So I want to tell you about my father. My father is a quiet, consistent, loving man who's been teaching for the last 48 years, and my mom isn't sure if he's ever going to retire. More than any other person, my father led me to recovery. Almost 11 years ago, I sat across from him at the kitchen table. I had burned my life to the ground. I had dropped out of school. I was arrested on felony charges, and my hands couldn't stop shaking from the alcohol withdrawals. My father did something amazing. He looked at the son he had raised, who had squandered tremendous opportunities, who had lied to him, who had stolen from him, and he forgave me. He tapped in to his own struggles and found a way to convey to his son that he was more than what he had done. I look at this moment as one of the single most important moments of my life. But I also received tremendously high quality care, long-term treatment. My family received family support, and I returned to a college that had a collegiate recovery program. What I realize now is the deck was thoroughly stacked in my favor. And I know that most people don't have those opportunities. So that is the question that drives me every day, is what would our society look like if we treated all people who use substances with dignity and with respect? The first car I was able to buy in recovery was the 1992 Dodge Caravan. This is something we call in recovery rooms a meeting maker. You see, many of us have problem with cars, licenses, payments. In my case, I drove into a stream. And so for us, it's a really powerful point of pride when we're able to purchase our first vehicle in recovery. And these amazing vehicles take us all sorts of places. And they provide this incredible opportunity to be of service to new people by taking them to meetings. So I was driving in this car for a couple of years, and a friend of mine offered to paint it up for me. So it came back looking like this. Decorated with logos at the shelter where I worked. I was even more proud of this vehicle. So I was driving the Scooby-Doo van through a predominantly black neighborhood to a friend's birthday party. I was speeding and I got pulled over. I was 5 years in recovery at the time, and I figured they'd just let me off with a warning. They asked to search my car. Suddenly there were 2 other police cars there. I consented to the search, hoping they would let me off. They searched my car thoroughly, and then my body, finding a whole bunch of fast food wrappers and recovery literature. They handed me a ticket and drove off. I sat in my vehicle and I cried. The experience had been crushing and humiliating. When was society going to forgive me? Did they pull me over because they had pulled up my record? Did they search my vehicle because of what I had done in my past? And even so, should anyone be treated that way? What the experience made real for me is something that's happening in communities of color in our country on a daily basis. It so happened to be a rare reversal of what was going on, but it brought that home for me. and I had read The New Jim Crow, which makes the convincing case that the war on drugs is just the latest chapter in a long history of racial oppression in our country. I started reading more and more about the war on drugs, and what I found was that people of color were more likely to be pulled over, more likely to be searched when pulled over, more likely to be arrested when searched, more likely to be convicted when arrested, more likely to be sentenced to longer periods of time and have fewer opportunities for probation and parole. Over time, we became the greatest incarcerator in the world. How did we get here? I came to the conclusion that we as human beings look for ways to escape. In this case, the escape is to blame someone else. We think drug use is an inner city problem, though it never was, and it isn't now. We think these things don't happen in our neighborhoods, not to good families. And when they do, we create sufficient shame and stigma that they are swept under the rug. Our desire to escape and to blame others has led us to some simplistic and unrealistic solutions, that if we can simply eliminate the substance, we can eliminate the problem. What we have done is made drug use and drug taking a moral issue rather than a health issue. And we have eroded 4 decades of scientific research that demonstrate clearly that addiction is a chronic brain disease. Certainly, many of us are guilty of that. As a professional and as a person in recovery working in the field, I'm often guilty of thinking that there is a one-size-fits-all model for how we solve substance use problems. When people come in and they follow our directions, they go to meetings, they go to therapy, they're of service, they don't use drugs, they do very well. When they don't, they come back and they reinforce our superiority. There's been nothing more humbling for me than the last 6 years of working with families in our family education program. I've come to believe that it is irresponsible for us to label families as enablers or codependents after short conversations with them and barely hearing their stories. I found these terms to be re-traumatizing and unhelpful. What we have is amazing, strong, resilient families that attend our family education program. They doggedly pursue the best options available for their loved one's care. And it is humbling to watch as some families do all the right things and execute well and interact with their loved ones in loving and caring ways, and yet still have tragic results. And I have seen other families do all the wrong things and have wonderful results. So I've come to the conclusion that I'm comfortable saying 2 things to all of our families. One of them is that your loved one is very lucky to have you involved in their care. And the second is that it's never a bad thing to tell your loved one that you love them. These 2 truths, putting love first and trying to take more than our share of responsibility, will take us far. One of the first things I did when I came to VCU was to do the Safe Zone training, which is our training for how we create a community that is more inclusive for our LGBTQ friends. What I realized was the substantial parallels between the LGBTQ identity, and my own recovery identity. As I was becoming more and more successful in my career, there was more motivation for me to hide my past, to hide my recovery. Now that I was a faculty member at a university, I could really pass. But I also realized that by passing, I would be sending the message to my students that their recovery was something to be hidden and not celebrated. That couldn't be farther from the truth. What they have taught me, our LGBTQ friends, is that my job is not to create a small haven within a larger recovery hostile environment, but to create a recovery-ready campus, a campus that embraces students in recovery, that looks for opportunities to identify problems with substance use. What I love about working on a college campus is that we have very little leverage. It is against our best interest to create punishments that go beyond the natural consequences of use. Instead, it is our role to help people tap into their inner motivation, to make recovery an attractive option, and to create allies everywhere who help students engage in supports, who make it a comfortable place to be a student in recovery. What I believe is that if we can do this on a college campus, then we can do this in our larger community, we can do it in our state, we can do it in our country, and we can do it in our world. There's a great analogy that makes this so clear to me. If we take a dying tree in a forest and we pull it out of that forest and we water it and we fertilize it and we give it life and it blossoms and it flourishes and it grows, and then we take that same tree and put it back in that same forest, should we be surprised when it withers and dies? And do we blame that tree for its failure? What we need is not just individual recovery from substance use and not just family recovery. We need societal recovery. To this day, Father Bill from the Caron Foundation gives the best definition of addiction that I've ever heard. He says that addiction robs us of the capacity to have intimate, lasting relationships with ourselves, with other human beings, and with any sort of higher purpose, till the only relationship we have left in our lives is with the substance itself. Addiction has done well at tearing us apart. It hurts families. It crushes communities. But we must move forward motivated by love and empathy and not by fear and blame. Recovery is about reconnecting to other human beings. In the end, addiction forces us to decide what kind of society do we want to be. Will we be a society that blames, that punishes, that focuses on the politics of fear? Or do we want to be a society that loves, that forgives, and that heals? Thank you very much.